ARE Podcast, episode number 8.
Welcome to the ARE Podcast. Where it's all about encouraging and inspiring you today so you can fulfill your dream of becoming a licensed architect tomorrow. And now your host. He lived on a boat for 6 weeks in Marina del Rey, David Doucette.
Hello, and welcome to another exciting, action-packed episode of the ARE Podcast here. This is our first podcast where we have a baby stroller and a mobile camera or phone joining us with special guest Guy Horton. So we're going to talk about a couple of things about the profession, and we're titling this episode, Why the Profession of Architecture Doesn't Suck. So we're going to bring Guy on in a second, and of course, Eric Corey Freed. Today is in Palm Springs, so you're home today for a bit.
Yeah, I get around a bit, but today I'm at home relaxing in Palm Springs.
You look relaxed today.
Do I?
Yeah. And Guy, thank you for joining us outside in your stroller with your baby.
No problem.
Great to have you. I'm looking forward to what we're going to talk about today. So, I guess briefly, since Guy, actually, you're our first guest, or first special guest here for the podcast, so I'll introduce you briefly, and then we'll talk. So, you're a writer in Los Angeles, and you frequently appear on Arc Daily in the Indicator column, as well as a contributor to the Architects newspaper, Metropolis Magazine, Huffington Post, and a slew of other architectural type magazines. And
right.
What we're going to talk about today is you wrote a rebuttal to an article called Why I Left the Architecture Profession, which appeared in Arc Daily last October. About a week later, you wrote a rebuttal to that, so we're going to get into that. But before we do, Guy, I want to ask you, where did you go to school as a first question?
That's a long story. I was probably in school far too long than I should have been, but I was originally in the humanities, doing a PhD at UCLA, and then somehow I got inspired to pursue architecture, and I went to SciArc here in Los Angeles. And I did my MArch at SciArc.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
And how did you get
That was the beginning of that.
The beginning of the end. How did you get into writing about it? That sort of coincided.
I'd always been doing the writing on the side. I think at one point in my life, I was just determined I was just going to be a poet or something like that. But in architecture, I'd always been doing some writing here and there, a little bit, doing book reviews for Architectural Record. That's how I started out. I had an editor there who liked my book reviews, so there's a whole slew of those I did. Anyway, session came along, and I found I had a lot of free time. So I just told all these editors I had been contacting that I was available. And it was around that time I started the Indicator. That was sort of the first writing I had been doing on the internet. So I wrote to the editor, the head of Arc Daily, and I said, I think you guys need a critical column or blog of some sort. They didn't have any content like that at that time. And now Arc Daily has lots of content, but back then they didn't have anything. So I wrote them and I said, hey, I think I could do this. And that was when I started the Indicator.
And how long ago was that?
I guess around 2008, I think.
Okay.
Back then. Yeah, it's been going for quite a while.
And why the title The Indicator?
Well, I just thought, because to me, at the time, coinciding with the economy crashing, and I was thinking in terms of kind of being an indicator, really, of or looking at indications of what's going on in a broader sense. So trying to look at architecture in terms of culture, the social and cultural and political and economic side of architecture.
Cool.
So, yeah, I mean, you look at Arc Daily and lots of cool buildings and stuff, but I wanted to talk about other things.
And what do you do? Also in your bio, you mentioned podcasting in NCARB. What's your involvement there?
Oh, well, so I do some blogging for them. They recently expanded. I don't know if you probably know the show with Frances Anderton, DNA.
Right.
Design and architecture, and I'd known her a little bit, met her a couple of times. I interviewed her for the Huffington Post one time. Anyway, they wanted to expand the reach of the show a little bit, and so I was asked to come in and do some blogging and a little online work. On-air recording for them. So that's how that got started.
Cool.
So once in a while I'm on the radio, but a lot of it is just blogging and stuff.
And you write a lot. I mean, you put out a lot of articles.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I suppose so. I don't know how that happens, but
and we can follow you on Twitter at Guy Horton. Which, by the way, I think you have one of the best little thumbnail pics I've seen. It's evocative. Whatever are you looking through a glass or what are you looking through?
Well, okay. I guess there's a little story there. There's an artist. His name is JR. He won a TED Prize a few years ago. And one of my stories was about him. And he's this. He doesn't like the term. He's not really a street artist, but he is. You know, he puts his art up in the streets. He would take photographs of people and do these huge collages of posting people's images up on buildings and so forth. And so he had this photo booth when he was down at the TED Prize, and you could take your picture in the photo booth. And that's where that came from.
Oh, cool.
So, I don't know, I was just sitting in the photo booth, and I had my camera, and I took my lens off, and I don't know.
Well, so there's never a simple story with us architects. There's always a background of something,
yeah.
You know.
And I'm just too lazy to change it, so it's kind of my thing now. I just can't keep it.
Yeah, no, I'm
stuck with it.
Yeah, totally. It's a good one to be stuck with. All right, so let's jump into Christine's article. Christine Outram, who wrote "Why I Left the Architecture Profession."
Kindling.
We got
Sorry, my baby's talking.
We got a live audience today.
You're gonna have some feedback from my baby.
No worries. So in Christine Outram's article, I actually reached out to her last week. I haven't heard back from her, so maybe she's feeling like she's had enough after she wrote that article.
Yeah, I didn't mean to jump on her either. You know, nothing personal. Just
well, you know what's funny is I was putting the show notes together this morning about this, and I wanted to be very objective about it, and I wanted to see it from her point of view. But I got to tell you, and we'll talk more about this. It strikes me as this is written by somebody who doesn't have a lot of experience in the architecture profession, and we'll talk more about this. But I tried to be objective as I put this together, but it was hard.
Yeah. I mean, I think she was just passionate and felt the need to. I mean, that happens these days, right? You know, if you're not. It's so easy to just put your ideas out there on the web and not really edit yourself if you're not careful.
Exactly. Yeah, right. Exactly. And I mean, to her credit, her article did spawn your response, which spawned, us bringing you on the show. And it spawns a discussion. So it serves a purpose. I think
it started a discussion. Yeah. Because I think she's not the only one who thinks that. And that's part of a problem in the industry too, is that a lot of people don't see the value of architects in general. So
exactly.
And that, that ties into fees and salaries and everything else.
So Eric, let's wake you up over there in Palm Springs. Bring you into the conversation here.
Is it my turn to say something?
Yeah, I don't think you've gone that long without saying something before on the show.
I was trying to do some billable work while you guys were yapping away.
So Eric, talk about why don't you read the beginning of Christine's article there, where her basically opening paragraph, and I think it's a little provocative here. So why don't you go ahead and read us that?
Well, first of all, it starts, "Dear Architects," and she doesn't capitalize architects, which bothered me right away. Lowercase architects. And the first sentence is, "You're outdated." I know this because I was once one of you, but now I've moved on. And I've moved on because people, despite your love of a great curve and your experimentation with form, you don't understand people. Oh, I correct myself. You don't listen to people. And that's her first paragraph. And I mean, if she wanted to get my attention, it worked.
It definitely was attention getting. And Eric, what was your first response when you read that? Did it sound like go ahead.
Oh, my first response was, I know exactly why she says that, but you have to understand, the architects that I know, that I'm friends with, and that I admire, are fighting against that. I think that's the stereotype. And yes, of course there are architects like that. And, I could start to rattle off a list of names of architects that are like that. But in truth, I think there are many, many, many of us, hopefully the majority, that are fighting against that our job is to listen to people and to find these magic ideas that make a building really sing for the client.
Well, and I think the line that sort of struck me the most, you're outdated, but that actually even wasn't the bigger one. It was the idea of you don't understand people. And when I read that, immediately I'm thinking, this person doesn't understand really what an architect does, because, we have to understand people. And to say we don't, I don't know, it discredits it a little bit. It takes it down a notch. What was your reaction, Guy, to that opening paragraph?
Well, that's probably what got me started. I had to calm down and read the whole thing. And I remember, being not quite like from her point of view, but, when the recession was really bad a few years ago, being very angry about the whole profession and the whole system and so forth. And it's very easy to do that, but I read it all the way down, and then I thought, I think this is just like more emotion than logic and analysis on her part. But it deserves a response. And I agree with Eric that I think the profession is really about listening, and I think I said this in my piece, which is that the marketplace will determine the ones that are good listeners and good at feeling what people's values and needs are. And those architects that aren't doing that kind of stuff, they're the ones that they won't be as successful. They won't rise and produce the same kind of work. So, but I think that the profession is really about trying to feel and perceive and sense, and spatially, but also in terms of human needs, right? That's what we do.
Yeah, and she's got,
we try.
She's got another paragraph in here where it's I think you're right. It's an emotional piece. It's reactive. And this another part here, she says, but the truth is most of you don't try. You rely on rules of thumb and pattern books, but you rarely do in-depth ethnographic research. You might sit at the building site for an hour and watch people use space, but do you speak to them? Do you find out their motivations? Do your attempts really make their way into your design process? And she's proposing these questions, and what this really is, I mean, it's programming. It's programming 101, and that is what architects do. I mean, that's part of programming. We listen to people, we gather research. So it's kind of crazy to say we don't do that.
Yeah. I mean, in fact, the architects I know that are really, really good at what they do, they go beyond that to even innovate new approaches. Like when they're working with a corporation on their new headquarters, say, they come up with all kinds of things that the people on the client side weren't necessarily thinking of. And how about this? And what about these types of collaborative spaces? And how about this type of, we turn this elevator area into, some type of flexible meeting zone. And by the way, we're going to put in trails and bike path all the way through your campus and whatever. It's like architects add a lot to all of that as well. It's even more than just you're listening, but you're responding and coming up with even more for your clients potentially, right?
I think so, and I mean that's what we do. We want to help, we want to contribute, and we want to help our clients' vision. And I think this article is written from the standpoint of almost like the Fountainhead or Howard Roark, where this guy just comes in and says, "I'm doing my design the way I want."
Right.
And that's not the reality.
Very old. Yeah.
Oh, it's old. Yeah.
Go ahead, Eric.
Eric, you can chime in here.
Oh, nice. I agree, and I felt as I read her article, and reread it, 10 times, and slowly I think she started. I think what she really meant to say was she was targeting the more visible starchitects, which is a term I hate, by the way. But but the architect that came to mind, quite honestly, was Frank Gehry. And it seemed like that was her letter to those, him and his ilk, where you hear about the complaints where, MIT hates the Frank Gehry building that they built because it doesn't meet their needs at all. Or you hear about, Richard Meyer and the Getty with his white gridded buildings everywhere. I mean, I think that's a very certain type of architect, and it's also a very, very small minority. It's maybe 5% of the entire profession. The bulk architects that I look at, if anything, I fault them for not being form givers enough. They get a little too obsessed with programming. I mean, I'd like to strike a balance between the two a little more. So
right.
I wasn't recognizing the bulk of the profession in what she was saying. I was really recognizing just this very narrow sliver.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about her Starbucks article that she referenced, which I thought was interesting because, she talks about why does Starbucks design round tables in their stores? It's because, nobody feels left out. And I think this was even a little outdated. You click on the link, it's not even there anymore. And Starbucks, in their sort of redesign, they're redesigning their stores. I'm a fan of Starbucks, by the way. I'll fess up. But they're back to their sort of square tables. So and it seems like she's basing her whole article on the premise that, hey, because Starbucks uses round tables, they listen to their customers and we as architects don't. What do you make of this guy?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, it's, she's globalizing the profession, which, I mean, with my humanities background, that's a fallacy and easy to debunk. And then she's using one example to support her globalized view, so it's really invalid. But I take her point, but I think you have to look at it very specifically. Starbucks is designing those stores the way they do because they want to increase traffic and they want people to come in and think this is a more comfortable place to be than the other coffee house down the street. And so I don't really think they're being innovative. They're just being smart at business. And, they're following through with their designs that way. But
which, since we're talking...
Good design often... What's that?
Since we're talking about Starbucks, I'll just briefly say, anybody who goes to Starbucks to work, they have AT&T as their Wi-Fi. And I read an article last year that Google is taking over the Wi-Fi contract. And I'm happy to report in LA on Barrington and Olympic, Barrington and National, which has had the slowest Wi-Fi ever. They now have Google Wi-Fi, and it is so fast. It's awesome. So I'm excited that Google is kicking out AT&T in terms of the Wi-Fi department at Starbucks.
Here's how fast.
Good.
Here's how fast that Wi-Fi is at Starbucks. He was so excited about it, he texted me to tell me. Can you believe how fast it is?
Well, that's our office. Hold on, I'm going to make a bottle, but I'm listening.
Sure.
I'm actually making a bottle right now.
You know what the issue is with that Starbucks example is that it could easily go the other way. She could have replaced the word round with square and still made the same point. But right, and in truth, you could argue, depending on who you talk to at Starbucks, if you talk to the baristas, they might prefer square tables because when they mop up at night, it's easier to stack them, or it's easier to cluster them. They might find that they prefer square tables because they maintain aisles, and the round tables tend to move more. So you could. It's not a very good concrete example in that you could see how you could justify either or, and it has nothing to do with aesthetics in either one, and both would be justified because of programming. I also know for a fact that Starbucks employs many architects. They have their own design department.
Yes.
And it's staffed by architects. So that decision was made by an architect whose paycheck came directly from Starbucks.
Yeah.
I want to read this one partner article. She's saying, now I'm not saying that all architects are dumb in this regard. Residential architects are often quite successful when it comes to building livable spaces. And then there's Gale architects. They're particularly known and respected for their ethnographic techniques, though these days they seem to focus on master plans and urban regeneration, and I don't think they really do architecture, do they? And even then, I would have to assume that these architects employ old school methods of observation with limited sample sizes. So here's the issue. She put herself out there. Again, I wanted to be objective to this. But her last line here is, and even then, I would have to assume that these architects employ old school methods of observation with limited sample size. She's just assuming this. My question is, who's not listening now? She's saying, us as architects aren't listening, but she's now writing this article, and she's writing, I assume these architects just employ old school methods. It's, talk to architects and find out, That got my goat. That was where I was like, I
mean, I see her shot across the bow is just sort of an extension of the fallout of the economy. It's just another symptom of that. You have a lot of people who are displaced or who are upset with how. And again, there's as many types of practicing as there are architects, and there's no one standard approach, and everybody runs their offices a little differently. But I just think that out of the recession, the other positive things were that there was a lot of growth in terms of how to do business and ways of practicing and approaches to design. And so I think people have been learning a lot from this whole period of turmoil and, trying to adapt to new marketplaces and find new types of clients. And if you're not listening, well, goodness, then there's not even a place at the table for you, right?
Well, and you have to. And I think what happened in 2008, I mean, it happened to just about every profession was affected, and every profession is doing what we're doing. They're trying to figure out, okay, we've survived, we got through it. Now, how can we look at this in a new light? What can we do differently? And, that applies to every
business. It's also an
business.
opportunity because, if the practice slows down, you've got some downtime, you can take on other things. Or it's also that people started looking inward to see what they could, like you said, what they could do differently and how they can strengthen their business when things start getting better.
It just reminded me, you just mentioned that guy, it reminds me of Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell's, which I'm almost done listening to on Audible. Fantastic book. But what's interesting, one of the things he talks about is, you take two people with equal talents, and why does one make it and one doesn't? And it has to do with outside influences. It has to do with just sort of circumstances and a little bit of luck. But also, I think it has to do with the drive of the individual. You could have all the talent in the world, but if you're not motivated, or if you would rather just rant about something rather than say, okay, where's my opportunity here? You're going to be left behind.
I mean, the recession hurt everybody in the profession. I mean, one way or the other. Even the big firms got hit and slowed down, and it happened. I mean, for people who've been in it for a really long time, this wasn't the first time it's happened either. It's just that this happened to be a really big one. But every time that happens, the recovery brings up something different, I think, in the profession that becomes a potential in terms of how you practice and your client base. And also clients had to change too. They all adjusted and adapted and had to find new ways of getting the architecture that they wanted. So,
let's
everybody I talk to, they say the business has changed so much in the last the last 10 years.
It has, for sure. And I think we as architects, we need to be better business people, number one, which is still, something that's not taught in architecture school. And in fact, you know what, to her credit, let me find one thing that actually she said that I did agree with. Where is it? It was the part about the architects not using the internet, as well as they should, and that I actually do agree with. I think we need to be sort of more innovative in sort of the internet realm.
Well, the standing stereotype is that most architects' websites are terrible. They're designed for flash and looks, and their usability is horrific, and that's pretty true. Architects seem to have this huge disconnect with technical ability, and I can tell you firsthand that we get a lot of people asking us about our exam guides, and what I would think would be simple technological things of how to deal with PDFs and such, and they're kind of admittedly bad with technology, which is odd because David, as you know, is incredibly nerdy, and so I agree. There is a disconnect, and with social media, there's a whole rise of new people that are rising up to help architects with social media. Our friend Enoch Sears is, he's teaching architects how to be more entrepreneurial. So that's there's obviously a need for it.
I want to mention. I want to talk about your article,
Guy.
I
mean, I think it was just
where basically. I want to talk about your opening paragraph where you say Christine Outram's rant, which is what it was, why I left the architecture profession, is an honest and seemingly spontaneous attempt at staking out a position against an quote unquote outdated profession. It's explosive in its assertion that you, meaning all of you architects, are out of touch. You don't listen to your clients. You are obsessed with form making. And it says, her essay hits like a splatter bomb, throwing shrapnel in all directions. It's a drone strike that has killed innocents. It's clumsy and reckless. And I got to say, when I first read that, I thought, Guy's being a little tough.
That's awful.
Yeah, I'm like, Guy's being a little tough here. But as I sort of dissected her article, I think you hit the nail on the head in your first paragraph.
Yeah, you could have stopped there.
You could have.
I should have stopped at that paragraph, I think. Yeah. It should have gone on Twitter instead of an article, but whatever. Yeah.
And, you talk about her globalized view of the profession, which is it's essentially an outdated stereotype, was what I sort of see it as.
Well, yeah, it's a type of cultural, globalization, and you can't generalize to that extent, obviously. And I think she's responding to very specific cues that are not being voiced or named, and giving them a very general face. And that in turn takes out all the architects who are doing just the opposite of what she's talking about. And I would argue that any architect who's working and being successful is not fitting her model at all. So
yes.
Again, maybe it's just that she's not aware of that, but I think it's right that she's pissed about some of those elements she talks about, if that's the case. But even there's a lot of nuance. You just have to be specific, and you can't just talk about the whole thing globally.
And I think it's hard. It's hard to tell her credentials. I mean, I'll read her bio just so we know something more about her, but it says Christine Outram is a human-centered #smart city and #big data strategist, music lover, and designer of the Copenhagen Wheel. She started her career practicing architecture and urban design in Australia. Since moving to the U.S., she's been a research fellow at MIT's Sensible City Lab, founded the think tank City Innovations Group, and is currently the senior inventionist at Deutsch LA. So it sounds like a lot of her experience is kind of, I guess, in academia. I don't know how much sort of real world experience she has, and maybe this is where some of her frustration is coming from.
Yeah. I mean, I think what this goes to also is I think there's just a problem in general in the media about architecture, and it's either that the focus is on the form making and the drama of architecture, and that's why you get all these sexy images of great architecture, which in one sense undermines the profession, because you're narrowing the bandwidth about what architecture does. And there just aren't any shows out there. I think there's one on PBS, I forget the show, but that tried to look at architecture. It's got some host. Do you know the show I'm talking about? And he goes around and looks at different buildings. And
no.
Anyway, my point is that the media narrows what architects do, and the perception. I mean, we're always trying to justify how great our work is, or how we can be thought leaders in different areas and so forth.
It is true.
It's always from a position of defensiveness.
In the public perception of architects is, as anybody who's an architect or in the architectural realm knows, it's a little skewed. In fact, Eric and I recorded a podcast last week about architects in the movies and how they're portrayed in the movies, and is kind of an interesting sort of fun dialogue about it. But we're sort of perceived as sort of the sensitive, smart type, but also sometimes I wonder if we're perceived as like the struggling artist. I don't know.
I think it's all that.
I guess it is, right?
Not and I shouldn't be globalizing either after I'm ranting about that. But hey, Kyling, that's my baby. She's ranting, but
she's upset
a lot
too.
of architects I know are. Yeah, she's upset. A lot of the ones I know, they're just very good at. They're just very smart, and they don't just cover the programming that's required. They go way beyond that when they are able to, and they bring a lot to any relationship and organization, and there's a lot of value that transcends just the spatial aspect of what they do that they can bring. And
let's I want to talk. There's another quote in your in your rebuttal, Guy, about as for leaving the profession. And one of the things that when I was doing the show notes, I'm like, I'm going to title this "Why the Profession Doesn't Suck," because it doesn't. It's a great profession. But it depends on your take. But you say if you leave architecture, it goes with you and remains always a part of who you are. It's much harder to stay. Your architecture, if you actually get to do it, is the expression of who you are. I mean, that's pretty good stuff.
Okay.
There.
I was just trying to say, it's hard. It's hard. There are days when it's hard, but you stick with it if you're passionate about it.
That's what
it means something to you.
That's exactly what it is. And I mean, you can listen to a whole host of podcasts and self-help books. And I mean, the buzzword for probably 2013 was passion. Everybody's trying to find their passion and how they can make money, doing their passion. So, Eric, what do you say about this passion idea? And do you buy you passion to do what you love to make a living? What do you think, Eric?
Well, I think architecture's long been sold that way. I mean, that's why we suffer with long hours and low pay, right? But there's nothing wrong with that. There have even been studies showing that people that follow their passion, whatever that means, live longer. So following your passion is a good thing as long as you're hopefully making the world a better place at the same time. Because for some people, their passion is making money and they're doing it at the expense of others. So I'm in the passion business. I like that. But I also think we need to be smarter.
Along with.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the passion. Well, the part of the passion is, like you said, that it's not that you suffer along with something that is a problem, but that you also try to make change. And I think, like the people I know working in different firms, they're always working from within to improve things, including their practice and how they approach problems, and learning about things like social media and learning about how to project more meaning about what they do to the public and how to communicate. I mean, a lot of the problem with architecture, I think, has to do with how it's communicated to the public. I see a lot of change in that area now. Like people are starting to learn how to talk about it with clients and how to get people's attention. And
I think one of the
baby again agreeing with me.
Exactly. Yeah, she's a good audience. I think one of the cool things about architecture is, and our listeners really of the show are could be considered intern architects, or they're going through the AREs, they're trying to get their license, hopefully motivated and inspired to get their license. I think what's cool about the profession, and you mentioned this earlier, Guy, it's got so many variations. That if we're trained as an architect and we're passionate about architecture, there's so many different directions that we could go in with that the opportunities are almost endless if we take advantage of them, from working sort of in the film industry or whatever we want to do. It's there.
Look at me. I'm a good example. I now primarily write about it. I don't really do architecture, but I'm happy with what I'm doing.
It's funny. I've realized that the last couple of years. One of the things I also do is teach candidates how to become licensed in California, and and now doing that with the AREs. I still do some residential architecture, but I've transitioned more to a content creator, which is kind of what you do, Guy. I'm a content creator who's actually creating content about architecture, and I like that role. I like that, and Eric, you kind of do a similar thing. Your main gig is you go around the country speaking about architecture and sins and spills and Starbucks and all that good stuff.
I speak at 70 events a year. Half my income comes from speaking and writing.
Wow.
And but I like it that way. For me, it solved one of the problems I had with architecture, was that I was only dealing with a couple people at a time. I was only affecting 2 to 4 people at a time, maybe. And now I get to speak to a room of 1,000 people, and at once I can kind of change their thinking, get them to look at the world in a different way. So for me, it was about impact. And but I still design. Most of my time is spent dealing with clients and design because it's very time consuming. And I work on the plane and the hotel, but most people are surprised that I'm still producing 20 projects a year. But I'll always love it, and I'll always do it.
Well, and you only sleep like 5 hours a night anyway, so that helps.
It does help a lot, actually.
I don't know how you do it. If I don't get 8, I'm a mess.
Well, some people can do that.
Like that's how I do it.
How many hours of sleep do you get a night, Guy?
Well, because of the baby, it depends. But last night was pretty good. But I function best with 8 hours.
Okay.
I don't try to pretend that I can do it with less. I just
Now, Guy, when you read,
like Ariana Huffington, she's got this whole thing about you need as much sleep as possible and to be healthy and all that.
You totally do. I try and nap if I can sometimes, but
I think that'll be I think I wrote an indicator, but I should write an indicator about sleep and architecture.
That would be a great one. I was telling Eric last month we were working on releasing CDS, and I worked till probably 1 a.m. one night, and the next morning I woke up and I felt like I pulled an all-nighter. It's like at my age, like working till 1 a.m. is an all-nighter. It is the equivalent of all-nighter for me.
He was so grumpy about it too. He can't let it go. He's still talking about it.
No, that's what happens to me. I get really grumpy, cranky.
Eric does his best work at 1 a.m.
Sometimes that happens with me. You never know.
All right. So, Eric, is there anything else you want to talk about, sort of this profession or architecture? Actually, let me rephrase the question to you, Eric. I certainly want somebody or our listeners to be inspired and I guess not be turned off by Christine's article. So what would your sort of advice be to sort of the person who's in the middle of the AREs and they might be struggling in where they fit in this profession? What's your advice to them?
My advice to them is that you need to stick with it. It seems that most of the people that leave the profession, because I've had many friends that have left the profession, whatever that means, they end up leaving at the wrong time. They leave at the early point of their career when they're doing the awful part anyway. What I say to them is, just hang out to you're 30 at least. It gets better. I feel like it's those videos for gay teens. You know, it gets better. We should do one for architects. It gets better.
Right.
Because you'll get more control, you'll get more responsibility, you'll get more authority, you'll get more presence, you'll get more impact. It only gets better. But most of my friends
you get more agency.
Right. They leave because they haven't finished their IDP yet. They leave because they haven't bothered to take any of their tests, and they're like, and to them it's a good time to leave because they think that they could duck out and save themselves the stress and the effort and the money, of course.
Yeah.
So they, a lot of them tend to leave about 26 to 28 when in truth, if they just push through it, they'll enjoy it so much more. And so I would like them not to leave. I think we need young, passionate people. And the truth is, they're thinking that architecture is the end unto itself, and in truth, it's a means to an end. For me, it's a means to change the world, to make the world a better place. And I'd like to think that for them it's the same thing, but I think they think that just by getting a different job, that somehow that's going to transform their life. And that's not necessarily the case. I mean, a lot of them end up going into related fields. They go into 3D modeling, or they end up doing information architecture and design. And so, as you said in your article, if you leave architecture, it goes with you and remains. It's always a part of who you are. So I think that's really the quote of the day is how you closed out your rebuttal, and so I love that.
And the thing, I'll throw it to you in a second, Guy, but I would just say, if you find yourself, if you're listening, you find yourself struggling, just get through it, take the AREs and get your license. And if you want to take a few years off, take a few years off, but get your license now while you're young, because it's going to be so much harder to do it when you're in your 30s, when kids come along, so just hang in there and get your license at the least. Guy, what would your advice be?
Well, yeah, definitely stick with it. And I think to keep in mind that, part of the problem now is the way the ARE is structured. And I've long been a critic of this current system. Well, it's been around for a while now, but the exam system, computerized system, and you schedule it yourself over a period of how many years, I think is actually a detriment. And I tell people who have been in the profession a long time, who got licensed a long time ago before all of this changed, that they had it easier when they just go in and blitz and take all the exams over a weekend.
Yeah.
They do it on paper in some gymnasium or something, and then they get the results, It's like they did, in a way, have it easier because they were forced to do it in a compressed manner. And so somehow I think this new system is working against a younger generation, because there are all kinds of things that get in the way, especially if you're practicing, if you're starting to work in an office and the office isn't really helping you with time to prepare and all this kind of stuff. It's like, so you have to approach it as a marathon, and that takes a lot of strategy. So you can't look at it in terms of I'm gonna blast through this and I'm gonna succeed, because you might fail one or two exams and have to go back and take them, and so it's a marathon. You have to somehow approach it. You have to really be thoughtful about your strategy, but
and
not give up, right?
And not give up.
That's hard, but it's hard to not give up at times, right?
It's hard to not give up.
I think you need support. Maybe there's a support group.
You definitely need the support group, because I think you're right. It's hard when you're in it. It's like when you're in that sort of dark spot of like, this just sucks, I want to quit. You got to get through it, because it does get better. And as Eric said, the older you get, the better it gets. I'm enjoying it now more than I did 20 years ago. All right, I think we covered it. Hopefully we encouraged everybody, and we didn't discourage. And if Christine happens to listen to this, we would love to have her sort of on the show as a rebuttal, but we probably have scared her away. But it's hopefully not. And obviously it's not a personal attack on Christina. We're just talking about her article. Which
I think people should read both.
Yes.
Read both and think about it. And, That's the main thing. Be engaged.
Be engaged. And that's what her article allowed us to do. And it allowed us to sort of revisit why it's important to why architecture is important to us. So, all right. On behalf of Guy, who's still walking around in the west side of LA, and Eric in Palm Springs, my name is David Doucette, and we will see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the ARE Podcast. Be sure to visit architectexamprep.com and check out our other podcast episodes, video tips, and the ARE blog. Remember to plan, practice, and pass.